So the third chapter of Ketubot is all about seduction and rape. And in the fourth Mishnah, we learned that the seducer pays for embarrassment, for pagam, which is blemish, and he pays a fine. And the rapist also pays for pain. And the Mishnah is going to start exploring around these issues. And we're going to pick it up. We're going to pick it up actually in the seventh Mishnah, defining all of these items. What is embarrassment? And here, by the way, the halakha really defines this in accordance with the status of the rapist and the status of the person who was of the subject. So in other words, depending on if you seduce or rape someone from a well-known family, the embarrassment is considered to be greater than otherwise. And if you're someone of low status, it's even more embarrassing. So the embarrassment depends on the status of the two parties involved, or the relative status. What about pagam, blemish? So the Mishnah says, pagam, ro'in ota ke'ilu hi shifcha nimkeret. We look at her as if she were a slave on sale in the market. Kama haitai yafeh, v'chama hi yafa. Literally, how beautiful she was and how beautiful she is. Now, beautiful is translated universally, and I checked back with Kahati as worth, financial worth rather than physical appearance. But we seem to be making a financial assessment here as to what her value, her monetary value would be as a maid servant before and after she'd been seduced or raped. Knas, the fine. Well, the fine is actually the same for everybody because it's a fine. And the Mishnah just articulates this principle. And any sum which is fixed in the Torah is the same for anybody. It doesn't make any difference. So the other two are different, but the fine is no different. And the pain is obviously going to be assessed according to pain. The question then is, and the Mishnah seems to be segueing here, because the Mishnah will go into questions about selling your daughter. So maybe you were mentally associating from valuing the question of blemish from the sale in the market, and we're kind of mentally associating to a father selling his daughter. And there is precedent for this, by the way, in a verse in Mishpatim, in the Parsha of Mishpatim in Sefer Shmot in Exodus. When a parent sells a daughter as a maid, she shall not go out as other slaves do. And it's not quite clear from the text what is going on here. But Rashi makes one important comment, which the Mishnah is going to reflect. And Rashi, by the way, is quoting the Mechilta and the Talmud in Arachin 29b. But I brought you Rashi rather than bringing the four sources. If a man sells his daughter as a maid, we're talking about a ketana. We're talking about a ketana, and this is actually someone below the age of 12. And the rabbis actually restrict. So we're talking about someone below the age of 12. And the rabbis actually restrict this ability of the father to sell his daughter to a daughter below the age of 12. And the Mishnah is going to enumerate this in slightly more detail now. Kol makom sheyesh mecher ein knas, v'chol makom sheyesh knas ein mecher. Where there's a sale, there's no fine, and where there's a fine, there's no sale. Now remember that the fine applies to someone who takes a na'ara b'tula. The word na'ara was used in the Torah when articulating the fine. Let's just hold on to that. But when we're talking about selling the daughter, Rashi quoted, and he's quoting the Talmud, Ketana. So let's just keep Ketana and Na'ara in our minds. So the Mishnah is going to go on to say, Ketana. By the way, that means a minor. That means someone below 12 years old. And the Talmud knows this. Ketana yesh la mecher ve'ein la knas. A minor can be sold by her father, but there's no fine. So there is, questions about blemish and pain and embarrassment all relate. So all those damages relate, but the fine referred to in the Torah doesn't apply because the Torah talks about na'ara, not about ketana. So for ketana, there is sale, but there's no fine. Let's go on in the Mishnah. Na'ara. Now, na'ara is a 12 to 12 and a half year old. I put this in the translation for you, but the Mishnah doesn't spell it out. The rabbis expect you to know that. Na'ara is 12 to 12 and a half year old. Yesh la knas, ein la mecher. There's a fine payable. The Torah says, the Torah talks about a na'ara, b'tula na'ara, when we're talking about the fine. Ein la mecher. Once this daughter reaches the age of 12, you can't sell her anymore. Bogeret. A bogeret is someone who's past 12 and a half. Bogeret. Lo mecher ve'lo knas. A bogeret who's a 12 and a half year old plus, there's no sale and there's no fine. The issues about pain, embarrassment, blemish, these of course still apply, but the fine doesn't apply. And the Mishnah is now going to talk about other situations where fines don't apply. Ha'omer. Pititi bitor shel ploni. Someone who says, I seduced the daughter of so-and-so. Mushalem boshet ufkam al piatzmo. He pays compensation for embarrassment and blemish on his own admission. Ve'eino mushalem knas. He doesn't actually pay the fine. Ha'omer. Ganavti, someone who says I've stolen. Very interesting that the Mishnah is going to bracket together theft and seduction. They're both criminal offenses. Ha'omer ganavti mishalem et hakeren al pi atzmo ve'eino mishalem lo tashlumi kefel ve'lo tashlumi arba v'chamisha. Someone who says I've stolen must pay back the principal on his own evidence, but he doesn't need to pay double, fourfold, or fivefold. And again, this Mishnah is all structured around the same chapter in Mishpatim. And if you go through that chapter in Mishpatim, in the book of Exodus, in Shemot, you'll see that there are different kinds of multiples listed there for people who, for example, abuse property in trust, that is double, steal different kinds of animals, which are fourfold and fivefold. And by the way, later in that chapter, I think either later or before in that chapter, the Torah goes on to talk about damages if your ox kills someone. So we're actually going through this chapter in Mishpatim, but in the Mishnah. So he says, "Hey, meet shori et ish ploni, my ox killed so and so, or shoro shel ploni, my ox killed so and so's ox. Harei mishalem al pi atzmo. He has to pay damages according to his own admission. Hey, meet shor avdor shel ploni. Hey, meet shori avdor shel ploni. My ox killed the slave of so and so. Einor mishalem al pi atzmo. Very interesting. He doesn't make restitution on his own evidence. I think because the Torah there demands a fine, and this is the general rule. Zeh hakla. Kol hamishalem yoter mima shehizik einor mishalem al pi atzmo. If you pay a fine, if you pay more than the actual damage you've done, then you don't pay it on your own evidence. In other words, if you admit to creating an injury, you don't have to pay a fine, but you need to pay the physical damage.